Episode 7, Wing It Podcast, GooseDigital.com. Who do we have?
Robin Kroll.
Mark Finnegan.
Kevin Butler.
Michael Turksani. All right, welcome, Mark.
Thank you.
Mark's debut.
First timer.
Digital Marketing Manager.
Indeed.
All right. Today we're talking about the top questions, burning topic of how to select a digital marketing agency and the types of questions you should ask part of that process during your evaluation. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, it's interesting. We talked to a lot of organizations, and there's probably two main camps. There's organizations that have used agencies before, and they sort of have a bit more of an idea as to how to go and do that evaluation. And there's other organizations who've never done this before. So a lot of them will actually quite literally say, I've never done this before, what am I looking at, kind of thing. I think there's this like weird sort of stigma that only large organizations need agencies, where there's actually all sorts of organizations need agencies. It just comes down to their needs and their goals and what they're trying to do and their ability to go do it either independently, internally, or whether they need some support somewhere along the way to achieve that.
So let's think about this. I mean, we're in sales cycles every day, basically talking to customers who are trying to make a selection. And it seems like there's a couple of different aspects of every deal that we're in. I mean, one of them is going to be budget. How do you actually figure that out? So maybe we'll think of some leading questions that could help to derive to a budget. The rest is around like the account process and how are you actually going to handle us as a customer once we're kind of on board. And I think I'd throw the third one into be, capabilities or, what are you really good at as an agency? And maybe I'd reverse the order of that last one and go capabilities, then accounts. But maybe we should start with budget because I know oftentimes people struggle with their budget themselves. So if you're sitting there, these can be questions that you'd ask the agency or just questions that you should ask yourself as you set up. But what kind of questions would you ask to sort of suss out your budget?
You mean internally ask her
Yeah.
when you're talking to the agency?
Yeah, either way.
Well, I think you have to, first of all, be clear on what you're trying to achieve, right? I mean, going in with a blank piece of paper is never it's never a good idea because there are just so many things you do. You need to be really clear on what your objectives are. So Kevin, to your point, for a smaller company looking for an agency, it might be to fill in specific gaps that they don't have the resources for, right? So there might be specific objectives. Certainly having a time frame because that's going to impact the budget you have as well. So trying to to sort of figure those out and having a range of numbers for your budget. Obviously, you want to be able to, as you're talking to different vendors, as you ask, let's say you have ABC on your list. And what they can deliver could be, we can deliver all that within a shorter time frame, be a little bit more expensive. What's more important to you? And then the add-ons. So I think it's, good to have a framework and understand what you want the outcome to be.
So if you're not aware of the landscape of costs that are out there, and you're right, you should have your requirements. So now I've got my requirements. I've got a good sense of maybe what my first year looks like. I think that'd be a good recommendation to think about at least a year out or more to get a sense of where this relationship is going to go.
But even before all that, I like the idea. So there's your goals and what are you trying to do?
Yeah.
But also, you kind of hinted at this too, or touched on it, is taking that sort of idea, those goals, and saying, what do we have internally that can either support some of that, a lot of it, not a lot of it? Because I think that's going to be...
That'll help you to shape whether or not you need it, how much to outsource.
And then the requirements of what you need from a partner.
But I think time and cost is interesting because a lot of what you're going to spend with an agency, it will be about ultimately dollars spent for hours or days to do things. I mean, sure, there's technology costs but if you take the tech out, so, I mean, Mark, you're planning customers' retainers, on a monthly, quarterly basis. They may not know that, building XYZ tactic takes 3, 4, 5 hours. So, I mean, what advice would you have in terms of educating them as part of the process when they're looking?
Yeah, I think, it's building out that that calendar, if you will, I guess, of what you like around your goals, what those next 12 months are going to look like. And then you got to break it down even further. Okay, so what do I got to achieve like this month in order to get me in the right direction, and then next month, and so on. And
But even the details in those steps. So I want more leads. Okay, well, that's that content, maybe a white paper or a webinar, and there's going to be a landing page, a series of emails, and then that plan, like calendar plan that you're building, that you're talking about, is a level of detail that in some cases organizations haven't thought of. They just said, I want to do lead gen. We haven't really done this before. We want to venture into it. And so an agency comes back and says, well, hey, that's 30 hours of work, or that's 50 hours of work, whatever the number is. And they say, what? And it's like, no, it's all the little details that you're talking about.
Yeah. Is it as much about you're trying to engage, 'cause, we speak to these clients and they don't necessarily have a fixed budget or have always done it before. So, they have limits to their budget that they can spend, obviously, but they're saying, okay, well, how much do you guys cost? But then you're saying, well, what are you really trying to achieve as part of that? So is a better question to ask, maybe from a vendor perspective, and then you educate internally, is how do you approach your planning? Like how do you as an agency approach planning my requirements to develop my budget on an ongoing basis, so that you can go through a scenario of, okay, here's a scenario of lead generation, and then you break down a scenario with them, and then they can come back to you and help say, well, that would be $30,000 or $5,000. Maybe that's a better way than say, what's your hourly rate? If I thought of another question, what's your hourly rate? And I was like, well, maybe that, that doesn't really tell you anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it is interesting, and that very often when you go to an agency, you're trying to achieve something that you don't know fully how to achieve it, right? That's why you go to the agency. So you might say, well, this is my goal, but really have no idea of the details that it would take to get there.
Right.
I don't know if that, Mark, do you have conversations with clients on that level where you have to sort of help them explain the different types of steps? And
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's really just getting a really strong understanding of what they're trying to achieve, and then it's coming up with this strategy that meets those goals. So understanding the audience, and that's where I guess I kind of have a bit of a challenge with this kind of hypothetical situation. It's like it can be completely different from one like industry to the next.
sure.
But yeah, it's just really getting an understanding. Okay, this is what you want to achieve. This is the audience that we're going after, and then it's building the strategy around. Okay, this is their pain points, and this is what we need to do X, Y, and Z in order to get their attention, and then to kind of get them to bite on whatever it is that we're trying to sell.
What about ROI? Like when you think about the budget and you say, one of the main decision-making points about selecting an agency is, how much is it going to cost to work with this company? Does ROI come into that, Kev?
It's brought up. I think ROI is a tough one because part of what Mark's talking about is a structure and how to approach things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, Robin, to your point, you're right. A lot of times if you're seeking support of an outside party, like an agency, you generally, I shouldn't say, a lot of the time you may not have a way to do that,
Right.
or sort of like an ability to do that. So ROI is sort of a nice to have. I think more of this is about an actual structure and way to go about doing this in the first place, because you
Absolutely.
probably didn't have a really good way of doing that.
Yeah, and I think ROI always comes up in the conversation, as in one of the things we want to be able to do is measure ROI of this investment with an agency. But I've never spoken to a company that says this is the ROI I'm trying to achieve. I mean, I think it's challenging enough to have them list out, 3 key success factors. That's even challenging for them to define.
Well, right.
And so to be able to get to an ROI, the interesting concept about ROI when you're talking about an engagement, which is a multi-year engagement, which
But
Yeah.
I think you're right, is an ability to measure and ROI are two very different things, but they're very important things. And I think before you can get into ROI, you have to be able to understand what are we doing, and do you actually have a sense of, is it working, is it not working? And not working is important too if you can properly understand the reasons for it not. because then that gives you grounds for future
adjustments.
incremental improvements, adjustments. Exactly.
Yeah, well, just if you break down the ROI part, right? So you're talking about the investment, which we're talking about. What's the budget to go ahead and engage in an agency? What is going to be my budget for my internal resources, right? So there's all things on the investment, and then the return. So, and that's another thing that you should be able to. You have to talk about with the agency is. What is the return I'm trying to get, and how will I be able to see it, and how will you help me get to that
point? If you said, if you're going in as a customer, I think we should preface with that it really does depend on exactly the digital solution that's being sold. If a digital agency, because that word is very broad, says to you, well, I'm going to put your ad over here, and all you're doing is, spending program dollars, media dollars, and I think in that kind of context, it should be like, and you should expect, the next part of the sentence, and you should expect to see X amount of something, impressions, video, visitors, conversions, something of whatever they're selling. But when it's more transformational, or that the agency is being embedded as part of your organization to complete work over time, then I think a good question to ask would be, how do you think about ROI? And it could be a combination of the two.
Are you able to actually identify it?
Yeah, can you measure? So then you'd hope the answers would be like, well, we put a measurement framework in place. Some of the dollars you spend with us may not be so easy to identify exactly back to a program. But on the whole, this is how we approach it. And I think if you're comfortable with that answer, that you'll be able to show the KPI reporting that supports your ROI then.
And I think that, a little bit of what we've just been talking about also is that there's so many different types of customers and businesses. And if we shift to sort of the next point, or another one of the points is, one of the things when you talk to an agency is that they need to be able to understand your business, your vertical.
Yeah.
So that's another key question, because in order to be able to help you right-size the investment, figure out how to measure a return, what's an acceptable type of return, what are some of the things you should be looking at, the type of audience, they have to have an understanding of your business.
Okay.
That's a good segue.
So that was a good segue. So what about so let's talk about the account process. So I think the account side of things, is that where we're going next? We had capabilities and account. Actually, let's go capabilities first before we go accounts, because that sort of ties into what you're saying, references.
Capability is an interesting one to me, because I guess, so in our world, it's all marketing automation. So it's, well, what capabilities do you have with a certain technology? But that's not the only side of it. Maybe it's industry knowledge, expertise with a certain size of organization, or even possibly solution. Is it a more transformative digital investment? Is it just simply snap in a marketing automation system and we've got it from here? So there's kind of two sides of the whole capabilities discussion.
See, I would argue that from the capabilities, it's not just about marketing automation, right? So
a lot of time that's the easy part.
Well, that is the easy part. So it's the knowledge of the technology, what's best of breed. But from the capabilities perspective, there's the strategic part, and then there's the account management. So there's several different aspects of the capability.
If I'm an organization that's planning on investing in an agency to support initiatives, possibly growth, possibly, I don't know, something else, I'm more concerned about their ability to navigate that journey with me and my organization.
We'll definitely get to the account process, but I think where we were going was, if you're asking, we have a couple of really good questions in there around budget and how to come up with a budget. If you said capabilities, where I was going and where I think we're seeing a shift is to these specialized agencies where they're actually good at a few things. And very good at those few things, and maybe as you start to go outside the edge of what their bullseye is, they're not so great. So I think some of that line of questioning comes down to, where's your core focus, and really pushing the agency to say, like, where do you focus, so that if they kind of say, well, and we'll do this, and we'll do your pay-per-click, and we'll do,
we can do everything. We'll do everything. Right? We're experts in everything.
Then you might, right, Mark? Like, I mean, how often have we seen, when we're migrating a client or we've been brought in where there was just too many things being trying to handle by one agency that wasn't doing a very good job at anything really.
Yeah, I mean, it can get messy when you're trying to juggle too much. I'd rather be really good at one thing than mediocre at a handful of things, right? So,
but it's funny as you say that. I'm thinking to a lot of conversations. It's not too often that an organization we're talking to says, "What are you guys really good at?" They say, "What can you do?"
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And they want like a laundry list almost. And to your point, I don't think anyone really wants to go and say, "We'd like to be a master of none."
Yeah. Well, it's I think it's harder for people to say no, right? Because they don't want to turn down the business. But that's, I think, from a client procuring an agency, and internally asking those hard questions of really what are we looking for, what makes the most sense to maybe outsource, and then the agency standing up to that and saying, well, you know what? After our first meeting, we can tell we're not a good fit. I mean, I don't think you hear that all that often.
No, it's pretty rare because I think it's so competitive out there, and so and I've had prospective clients say I've talked to 4 different agencies. You guys all seem to be the same. You all do the same laundry list of things. So what's different? Mm-hmm. And that's not really the case, but what's happened, in order to be competitive, a lot of agencies do that. They have this massive list of things that they have as their capabilities.
Yeah. Okay. So, Mark, are you going to chime in there?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I mean, in that regard, I mean, you got to use your best instincts on who you think is the right fit, right? But it's all about identifying, like, what's the best fit for your audience that you're going after. So I think in all of that, you can figure out what are the right channels to get to those people that you need to speak to. And
and I think if you were looking at it from, if there's listeners that are maybe very small businesses, they may benefit from having a slightly more like a smaller team that sort of does a little bit of everything. And but I think pretty quickly as you start to look around out there, it makes sense to go after specialists when you start, certainly when you start to spend money. So anything else on capabilities? I mean, do you need to be asking things like certification? How many certifications do you have? Any...
I mean, I think I just sorry to interject there. I mean, if you already have like your platform decided on, I mean, then and it's like Pardot, for example, I mean, you want people that know the tool, right? Yeah. So in that regard, you would want to see some certifications, I would think, and same thing for like Acton or Marketo or.
I think it's got a merit of value for sure. I don't think it's the only value. Mm-hmm. I think you want to see when you're out evaluating vendors or agencies that they have an ability to solve the problem, not just I know how to do this in a specific tool, but to truly understand all the things in there and to be a more strategic partner and say, well, I think we need to do this and this in addition to the original request.
Yeah, I just look at a lot of our clients, and a lot of them are trying to achieve some really like unique things in a lot of these automation platforms, and like knowing that we have the skill set internally to do that, where I mean they could be going to some of these like partners directly and not getting that level of service. I think that's like a big value add on our side.
Yeah, I mean, I think what Kev was saying is that you see the other way around, where a highly certified shop, but falls down on the ability to sort of strategically think through it and account manage the way through it. So yeah, I agree. Like I think if you had, some of these questions laid out, and we'll get to the account ones, and then the last question on the perfect side-by-side apples-to-apples comparison was, well, who has the biggest, list of certification? I suppose you'd go with the company that had the certs and maybe had that, all things being equal, if you could get there.
I mean, it's something you could tick off, right? So I guess that's with the technology that, those are certain things that could be either a yes or no, either that qualifies somebody in or qualifies them out. And then there's the more subjective things where there is no certification specifically. It's more on their knowledge, their experience, how they work, all those things that are sort of softer, that are a little bit harder.
But it is
to
true.
measure.
I mean, we do that. I mean, I think no matter how senior or junior you come in, you're put through Acton and Pardot and all the various toolings that we use, Marketing Cloud, Marketo, AdWords, analytics. So I mean, we have a baseline. So we do think it's important. I don't think we have a slide deck that says, hey, we've got 75 certifications under our belt. But I mean, I think it's probably a question to ask, especially if you're going down this route of more specialized agency, to make sure that there's, or at the very least, they have a process for, how they think of internal education.
It's a balance. I mean, I think about it for when we hire the next marketing automation specialist at Goose. As we grow, we're going to need more talented folks to go and do that and manage these platforms for our customers. But just because they don't already have a consultant level certificate for Pardot doesn't mean we don't think they can get there and do that. If they have an analytical approach to things, if we think they're really good at solving challenges, blah, blah, blah.
Okay. So I think that was great on the capabilities. Let's get into account management. So, I think we had this one, on Friday, who would work with us? Who would work on our account? How do you think of, important question?
It's a very important question. I mean, and it all comes down to,
says the account manager.
Says
right.
Well, and I'm looking at it on my side, is it's not just going to be me, it's going to be several members of my team. Like it's going to be certain specialists, and it again kind of all goes back to, okay, what are you trying to achieve, and what channels do we need to reach out onto? I mean, there are different members of Goose that are all experts in certain different things, right? So
yeah,
I think that's what I would be looking for, is a diverse set of skill sets.
Agreed.
From a vendor, and that's exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, I think if you had, I know what we do as part of our process is usually have a slide that shows, these are the individuals that we would certainly assign to you as part of your first year, for sure. And they have different roles and different skill sets underneath them, right? Whether it's even Robin coming in and doing, data and insights work, or, somebody that's supporting multiple people that are supporting the platform. So that tends to be, if you can get an answer that comes back with a diverse set of individuals that are going to be a part of the process versus maybe, one guy that's got a year of experience out of school, like, it's probably a red flag. Or girl.
Or girl. That's right. Equal opportunity.
Equal opportunity there. Equal opportunity red flag. Yeah.
There's a little bit about the personality in there also. I'm just thinking back on some past experiences when I've assigned account managers to run different accounts, and had sort of a choice between a couple of them, and understanding the client who was going to be the client lead, and then looking for personality that would you'd want to
match that up.
Match that up. I mean, Mark spent a lot of time speaking and meeting with your customers, with the leads, and I mean, you're a pretty easygoing guy. So I know we know they all like you, but sometimes people have different styles of working, and
that's true.
You want to be able to match those together also.
Yeah, I think you just have to be adaptable. I mean, you're going to deal with a lot of different personalities, that's for sure. And it's dealing with whatever their needs that come, and giving them the best kind of solution that you see that's fit.
I want to talk about, so, who's going to work on our account, I think is a good flesh out question. I want to emphasize, a topic that is important. We've wrote blogs on this around, being a great service provider. After the honeymoon process is over and you've selected this vendor and you're working with them, like, the work process becomes so critical, right?
The trench work.
Yeah, I think thinking about, like, how do you handle us on an ongoing basis is what does that ongoing work process look like? So, Mark, like, how, why don't you just say a little bit about how we handle it, and I think that'd be the type of answer that you'd want to make sure you hear.
Yeah, I mean, so I think it kind of goes back to what I was saying before. I mean, you first try to, like, establish at least what you want to achieve in, like, your first year, and then you're breaking that down by a month. And then within, like, a monthly planner that we typically build with our clients, we're showing them week in, week out what that looks like to get us to everything that they're looking to achieve. And then we're reporting back on where we are, if we're ahead of schedule, behind, or exactly on kind of target, and then what we need to do to kind of continue that momentum going into the next month and so on.
Yeah, like little things like, do you have a weekly meeting, or what is the meeting schedule? Like we were surprised to see out there that's, well, no, we're going to have our meetings as part of kickoff, but, like, does that just fizzle out after 45 days, or it's like, no, we, have a weekly meeting, and this is what's covered, and, your monthly reports come out like clockwork after, 7 days after the next month. And these types of things, I think, are the mechanics of how to keep a relationship on the up and up, right?
Yep.
I think to an extent you need to sort of see and then eventually know that your agency partner is going to continue to move the needle forward without necessarily waiting for every instruction or direction. Like you want to feel like they're just going to push forward too to like a healthy, reasonable amount.
Yeah.
But that they're not just going to sit there and wait for the next email to be engaged.
Yeah.
Yeah, we actually, it's interesting because we've heard that in some recent conversations as we were talking about how the account management works, and we talk about what would happen on a weekly meeting, a monthly, and then a QBR, which
yeah.
Really resonated well with the person we were speaking to, saying, yeah, this is the kind of engagement. And then calling out saying, well, what would be sort of the nature of each one of those meetings? So some of them would just be sort of reporting on what's happened. Some of them would be sort of projecting on future plans. But then there would also be a series of meetings saying, looking to us as a vendor to say, this is what we recommend you do. These are...
I was going to say, like this idea of there's like the more like the day-to-day tactical stuff, which have to happen. But there's also... maybe more of a long-term view of to what was the journey we're taking together.
Yeah.
And I think we'd all agree,
strategic touch points.
I think the agency's got to really dictate, like this is kind of like the adoption of new processes, tools that we're going to take you on, Mr.
Right.
Client, Mr. and Mrs. Client. And that's part of why you've partnered with us, because we have a view as to what this looks like, and more importantly, how we're going to get there. And so part of the maybe monthly, but probably the quarterly sessions is more about this is where we are in that more long-term view. All these small tactical things we talk about on a day-to-day basis make up just this tiniest little step as to how we're getting there in the big picture, but sort of reinforcing that idea that we really do have a grasp of that big picture, and we're trying to pull this along as swiftly as possible without skipping things in between.
So I think that's a good, that's a good 25 minutes of supporting a marketer and/or whoever's making this selection or their evaluation decision making criteria. 2 really good questions in budget, talking about capabilities and really what the agency is good at, and then about what it's going to be like the account process after the fact, and combination of the day-to-day tactics with ongoing strategic support. So I feel pretty good about that.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Maybe next time we can talk about experience and how to actually evaluate experience of an agency too.
Great.
That's interesting.
I know we didn't get into references or case studies, all other things, but these were 6 things I think that would really help. So, all right.
Great.
Cool.
Mark, good job.
Thank you.
Done.